Hi, so my name is Maria, and today we're going to be talking about maple syrup urine disease. So what is maple syrup urine disease, or MSUD as it's more commonly called? It is a metabolic disorder involving amino acids and the breakdown or inability to break down specific amino acids. How was it given this name? It was actually due to the smell of the urine of affected infants. So infants with the disorder typically have sweet-scented urine, and that is why this disorder was given this name. It occurs in 1 in 185,000 infants worldwide. It is more common in Ashkenazi Jewish and Mennonite populations, but it is considered a very rare disorder, so it's not very commonly seen. It is characterized by a harmful buildup of amino acids in the urine, specifically isoleucine, leucine, and valine. Because again, the body can't break them down in these individuals. And it's most often detected in infants because when it's not, it just gets more and more severe and can result in things like coma, severe seizures, and even death. So it's important to pick this up and quickly and treat it quite quickly. And it's treatable, but it's not curable. So there are ways to mitigate the effects, but there aren't ways to cure it and totally alleviate it at this time. So some major symptoms and characteristics of MSUD. So the sweet-smelling urine, as we mentioned before. And in infants, there are some slight differentiations between their symptoms versus like later in life, like after treatment, after it's been addressed. So in infants, you'll see some irritability, increased sleepiness, so for fatigue, drowsiness, difficulty feeding and breathing, so they struggle to, intake their food and even breathe sometimes. Muscle spasms are fairly common. Developmental delay, obviously you can't begin to see it fully right away, but these things over time become more apparent. And sometimes even coma or comatose state can result from this disorder. And then, over time, there's pharyngeal and vocal abnormalities with the voice, global developmental delay, intellectual disability, muscular hypotonia, or like the weakening of the muscles, reduced tendon reflexes, respiratory or breathing impairments. Seizures can also result, cerebral or brain swelling edema, and hallucinations can even result in more severe cases. Again, these are all possible things that people with this disorder can experience. People may experience some or all. It really depends on the individual, but these are some of the things that are characteristic of this disorder. Treatment for this disorder. So it's typically lifelong. A protein-limited diet is one of the first things that people tend to go to with this disorder, because again, the amino acids leucine, valine, and isoleucine are found in proteins, so you want to make sure that that's limited but very closely monitored. So like I said, close monitoration of the amino acid levels and protein buildup and metabolism of the individual is very, very important in this treatment. Liver transplant is actually seen in some of the more severe cases, or not even necessarily more severe, but it is a quite large step to take, and it can be very difficult, and liver transplant itself can be life-threatening, but it is one way to potentially mitigate the effects of MSUD. And then thiamine responsive treatment works in some individuals because the thiamine or B1 vitamin actually plays a role in the protein complex involving the breakdown of the branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, but it doesn't work with everyone. So it works in some people, but not all people with MSUD. So that's something definitely to try in some in individuals, but if it doesn't work, there are other methods of treatment. So the genetic and molecular causes of MSUD. So there are 3 characteristic mutations or areas of mutation of specific genes associated with MSUD. So the DBT gene on chromosome 1, BCKDHA gene in chromosome 19, and of course the BCKDHB gene on chromosome 6. So these are all areas where mutations are characteristic to MSUD. It leads to the inability to break down the branched chain alpha keto acid, which are derived from the following amino acids that I've been kind of referencing this whole time, but leucine, isoleucine, and valine. There are over 70 mutations associated with MSUD onset. Most of them are missense mutations, so like the substitutions are like things where the amino acid at that specific coding region, that specific codon actually encode a different amino acid than originally intended. But there are over 70 different ones that can actually be associated with this disorder. The DB2 mutation is, again, one of the mutations associated with MSUD. The DB2 gene, it's actually long-term, is dihydrolipoamide branch chain transalkylase E2, which is why I guess people call it DBT. The gene encodes for a part of the larger protein complex called the branch chain alpha keto acid dehydrogenase complex, and this basically just breaks down those amino acids I mentioned before, the isoleucine, leucine, and valine, right? It's found in the mitochondria. This complex is, and it's normal in its functional form. It enables this reaction on the screen. I'll give you a second to take a look at it. I'm personally not going to get into the chemistry, but just to have a general idea of what it does. And the acyl group, if you can see it there, actually refers to the acyl group of one of the branch chain amino acids I mentioned before. So it typically enables the beginning of the breakdown of these amino acids. And then, of course, mutation in this gene would inhibit or limit the breakdown of these amino acids. So mode of inheritance, it is an autosomal recessive disorder. So what does this mean? The individual must have 2 copies of the mutated allele in order to express the MSUD phenotype or be homozygous recessive. So if they only have 1 copy of the mutated allele, they will not express the phenotype, but they may be able to pass along the gene. They would be a carrier and be able to pass along the gene to their offspring. Okay, so an example. So we have a mom who is homozygous recessive and has MSUD as her phenotype. And we have a dad who does not have MSUD, as his phenotype is homozygous dominant, does not carry the disorder. So let's see what their kids would look like. We have the dad and the mom here. So let's put them on this Punnett square. And as you can see, all of their kids are actually heterozygous for MSUD. I'm going to move myself so you can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, so they're all actually heterozygous for the disorder. So they will not have the phenotype, but they will be carriers and able to pass it along to their offspring. So an individual must have 2 copies, just to reiterate this point, of the mutated allele in order to express the MSUD phenotype. So here's a pedigree analysis of what this might look like in a family or a few families. As you can see here, David has the homozygous recessive for MSUD and thus expresses the phenotype, where Tess is homozygous dominant and does not, but their kids are either, actually all of their kids here are carriers for this disorder. And so with a lot of autosomal recessive disorders, it tends to skip a generation, which you can see here, but then you can see in the next generation, 3 individuals actually express MSUD. Lily, Jared, and Erwin all have it. And so here I'm going to go into a smaller example from this specific pedigree of what that would mean genetically. So we have Michael and Sabrina. They're both heterozygous for the disorder, meaning they have 1 copy of the mutated allele, meaning that they're carriers and can pass it along to their offspring, but don't express the phenotype themselves. And therefore offspring, 2 of them have the disorder, 1 of them is a carrier, and then 1 of them doesn't have it at all. It doesn't have any of the mutated alleles, and I'm going to show you that in a Punnett square as well. So here's the Punnett square. Michael and Sabrina's their genotypes are shown here. And so the 2 capital A's represent the homozygous dominant genotype here, as seen in their child, Benny. And then they also have the possibility of 50% chance that their child will be heterozygous for the disorder. And as you can see, Nico is heterozygous for the disorder, and he is a carrier. And then they have a 25% chance that their offspring will actually have MSUD and have the disorder and express it in their phenotype. And as you can see here, Lily and Jared are both homozygous recessive for this disorder and thus express the phenotype here. So testing for MSUD. So it actually occurs typically in a lot of newborn screening panels. Actually, by the U.S., it's recommended that they screen for MSUD in infants, typically when they're 24 to 48 hours old, actually. So like pretty much right away. It's included in many newborn screening panels, but it is not technically mandatory. It's just highly recommended. You can opt out for like cultural or religious reasons. Newborn testing is typically $15 to $60. The hospital will cover most of the costs and charge you a small fee in many cases. There are, of course, different types of tests for this disorder, including biochemical genetic testing, such as analyte or enzyme testing, enzyme assay testing, and molecular genetics testing, including deletion and duplication analysis, sequence analysis of the coding region, mutation scanning of the coding region, targeted variant analysis, and sequence analysis of select exons. So there are many different tests, all involving basically looking at the genome or specific gene regions that are associated with MSUD in the suspect individuals and in newborns to see if they have any of the characteristic genetic sequences or mutations that are associated with MSUD. And many different labs do this kind of testing, and it may have been done in the hospital itself. Many hospitals do have labs, but some of the more well-known labs that do this testing are LabCorp and Quest. And early detection, like I said, is critical because if you don't catch it early on, the effects can just get worse and worse and can even result in death after only a few months of life. So it's very important to catch this early on for the best outcomes. And yeah, that's all I have to say about this. Here are my references. I'll give you a second to take a look, or you can pause. I don't know. I'm going to move myself, and I hope you enjoyed learning about MSUD.